for speeding.
Nick, we're going to talk about fashion and style and its role with rock and roll. Tell me a little bit about, do you remember the Motown stars at all and the way they used to dress in formal wear?
Motown's something that I didn't grow up with, so I don't really remember them that specifically, but I mean, obviously, you see films and you look back over footage of Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross and all those people. I mean, I think that they used to write really great songs then. The imagery was pretty straightforward, though, to me. I mean, you know, the suits, I always like the black guys that click the fingers together with the suits on. That's always a great image.
Compared to, for instance, the Beatles and Carnaby Street, that was much closer to home for you.
The Beatles are another group I really didn't grow up with at all. I mean, I only know Beatles songs from what my parents had played me, or obviously now I've heard all of them. But I mean, that had a massive effect in England and around the world, obviously. But to me, it didn't really affect the music I was doing, because it really was a previous generation. It obviously affected the music that I grew up with, but not me personally.
I take it then that your memories of the glamour period, the glam period, are very strong?
Yeah, from the 1970s, I think that's where most of my musical influence comes from. I mean...
Could you tell me that again? Where does most of your musical influence come from?
Right. Most of my musical influence comes from the 1970s. I suppose, just because that's what I grew up with. I mean, it's very difficult to say sometimes, because I never feel that I'm influenced specifically by any one group. I mean, it's often been quoted about Duran Duran that there's David Bowie and Roxy Music, which were groups I grew up with, and I still like to listen to that music now. But other than that, there was many other things. I think it was to do with the time, the fact that the Sex Pistols and the Clash and all the punk rock thing that was happening in England had just become a bit much after about 5 years. By 1977, 78, I guess, it was dying. And that was when I think it was time in England for something a little more glamorous again. It was to do with attitude. When I say a little more glamorous, I mean somebody that actually bothered about what they were wearing, the sort of places they were playing, and actually putting on a show, as opposed to just getting up on stage in their jeans and playing guitars. Everything I'd always grown up with was to do with performance, really, an overall concept, as opposed to just music, which does affect things. I think that many of the groups from the 70s affected people a lot more than people give them credit for. They also, maybe not so known, groups like the Velvet Underground, which is really 60s, late 60s, following through to Iggy Pop, which was started in the late 60s, going through into the 70s. They affected the people like David Bowie, which is interesting.
David Bowie is known for the way he dressed. He was one of the first people in the 70s who made people notice what people were wearing on the stage. So, do you feel that that's where you got a lot of your feeling about dressing and gender bending, so to speak?
I think that the clothes you wear, it's always important you feel comfortable in them. I did grow up with very flamboyant music, I suppose, or flamboyant looking people from groups. And so I can relate very easily to the likes of David Bowie or Lou Reed or those other so-called glam rock personalities, if you like. But then I think that style is something that should always be individual. It's really not what you wear, it's how you wear it and whether you look comfortable in it. I mean, it's kind of, sometimes I see people that are dressed up in immaculate suits and they really look very awkward. They look better in jeans and vice versa. And with me, I always liked fashion. I think it's interesting, the way that it affects youth culture. And it's good fun as well.
How does it affect you in your performance on stage?
I don't think fashion affects anybody's musical performance in any way. I can often tell whether I'm going to like a band by looking at a picture, to a degree. Obviously not until you hear them, but you can tell whether people have got an idea of what's modern, I think. And I do have an affinity with modern music. So if I see a picture of somebody and they're dressed like teddy boys, then I think, well, maybe I'm not going to like that so much. It sounds like a little bit of a sweeping statement in some ways, because just because somebody's dressed like a teddy boy doesn't mean I'm not going to like the music. But you know, there are certain things that identify with Duran Duran. We've always wanted to be modern. We've always wanted to be a step ahead of that. And our imagery is really just a personal thing. I mean, I don't necessarily wear clothes that are similar to Andy Taylor or Simon Le Bon, for that matter.
Okay, the current status of rock and roll and fashion, how do you think it's moving?
I think fashion is always very transient, and within music they're very closely related. I think there has been periods when music has dictated fashion, and sometimes when fashion has started to dictate music. But I always see it in the way that music must come first, and then everything else around it, really, it's just like icing on the cake, I suppose. I mean, it's a case of whether you personally take an interest in it. I mean, I take a lot of interest in our album covers and what the record label looks like and what sort of type is used on the back of the cover. And the stage production, obviously, is very important. I like to take care of detail. And I think the thing with fashion is that it's part of something within music, something which will always be closely related, and something that's to do with the youth of today and tomorrow. And it's always changing.
Do you enjoy getting made up, making yourself up, and picking out what you're going to wear? And
I think fashion's a very enjoyable thing, yeah. I think it shouldn't be taken too seriously. I mean, the phrase fashion victim has occurred over the last couple of years, and I think it's very understandable. People that will just go and buy the designer of the moment. I think that's a bit silly, really. I mean, people end up looking like clones. But I think to go and buy a lot of different things, whether they're cheap or very expensive, I don't think is even the point of the matter. It's a case of how you put them together and what it looks like, and the whole concept of imagery, I think, is fabulous. I mean, I like costume as well. Stage costumes for operas and plays and things are fascinating. Yeah, I think it's a good thing for people to be involved in, as long as it's not
to
too
backtrack
serious.
for a minute, the punk culture, which was certainly something that took over England for a long time. What were your feelings about the punk culture, which was much more of a rebellion than now?
I think that punk rock had a fantastic effect on music. In England, we had this dreadful thing called techno rock, which occurred in the 70s alongside glam rock, maybe a little later as well. You know, things with flying pigs and across auditoriums and ghastly songs that went on for 15 minutes and triple albums and that sort of thing, which I think really was all getting very boring. And suddenly along came this rebellious movement called punk rock, which was really anti all of those things that this techno rock had built up, all these long concerts with people standing still, not moving for 4 hours. Suddenly there was these young kids that only knew 3 chords. They weren't technical virtuosos, but they could get up on stage and they could actually have good fun at the same time as playing good music. And the fashion thing was again involved with it, because a lot of those kids that started that, I mean, they were David Bowie fans, and they grew up with the glam rock thing and didn't like the techno rock and wanted to get involved in something themselves without having to study for years and learn how to play. And they broke down a lot of barriers. It wasn't until I saw a group, a punk rock group, up on stage, and I was only 15 years old, and I was looking at them, and they were only about 17 or 18 years old, and they only knew 3 chords, and I knew 4, and I thought, well, this is going to be okay. And that's good. I think that it's really important for kids that do want to be involved with music to know that it really does come from the street, and that it doesn't necessarily have to come from years of studying and real boredom. I mean, it would have driven me crazy if I had to study piano for 10 years before I could play a synthesizer.
I realize that you are an individual, and certainly with this whole fashion style in music, it's, you know, it's what you feel you look best in, and the way you perform. Let's talk a little bit about your influences, if you deign to say that you were influenced by anyone.
Influences is always an interesting question, I think, because it's a case of were you influenced by people's attitude, or by people's music, or by the way people looked, or by the overall. Personally, I mean, I'm influenced by a lot of different things, I think. More than anything, things that I'm surrounded with. A video I might watch, or something I might hear in a club, or maybe something old that I'm reflecting on, or something somebody might say, or looking at a painting. I spend a lot of time wandering around galleries, and I just get thoughts and ideas, and that's what I try to put down into music, just an overall thing. As regards musical influences, there are some. I mean, I'd have to cite people like Lou Reed, and there was an English group called Bebop Deluxe that I think were very little known in America, that did some really great things, and Cockney Rebel and Sparks, and a lot of those groups from the 70s, I guess. I mean, people like Roxy Music that have always been cited, I think the only way they really influenced us was more to do with attitude. It was more to do with the fact that when they put a show on, it was a very special event, and everybody wanted to go to it and find out what was happening, and you knew something was going on. And I always wanted things to be that special, instead of just standing up there and rocking out, as people say. The thought of that I always despised.
So you weren't particularly, it wasn't like you wanted to emulate some sort of musical style necessarily?
No, I think that people who emulate things is not really... I'll start that again. I think that emulating other people's music is not really good. It's all very well to have certain influences. I mean, I'm sure all of us have. Some people say nothing is original. I tend to disagree with that. But I think the most important thing is that you create something of your own that is original, and that is a new style, a new way of looking at things. I mean, basically, the first Duran Duran album was our vision to cross dance music with rock music, together with atmospheric music. I mean, I could say, you know, all right, the rock music thing was a little more heavy. It was to do with, we'd just come out the punk thing, it was the Sex Pistols and that sort of heavy guitar. And then the dance music was people like Chic, that always had great grooves on the songs, and it was R&B based, but at the same time, you know, it wasn't the sort of thing you wanted to listen to at home, because you maybe didn't want to listen to We All Have Good Times on the headphones. And then the atmospheric thing, I mean, I grew up with things like Brian Eno as well, who maybe is one of my bigger musical influences, because I do think that he always tried to do things that were original and strive for something special, something modern. And I think that's the most important thing of all.
Modern. What, I guess you've seen the Rolling Stones when they went through their sort of Edwardian period of sort of foppy-looking boas and hats and feathers.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think when you saw that?
I think the Rolling Stones had some fantastic images. I mean, they really varied things over the years a lot. Many people say that they were always a year behind the Beatles or something. I don't think that was true. I think they're both just very different things. I think they had some great ideas, and it's nice that they are still going now. And I hear the new album's more modern sounding than maybe a couple of the previous ones.
You prefer to set the new style rather than follow the trend?
Oh, I definitely think it's important for me personally anyway to set styles as opposed to follow trends, because you've got to be a step ahead of people. I hate going to somewhere and seeing somebody else wearing something that I'm wearing, or going somewhere and listening to somebody else's record and thinking, gosh, that was out 6 months ago and it sounds like our new one. I don't think that's... it's nice to be able to move ahead.
I know you must get this question a lot about makeup and the sort of bisexual chic that it suggests. Do you want to talk a little bit about making up?
Let's talk about makeup. I think makeup's something which, it's a personal choice whether you use it or not. It's hardly a new thing. I mean, it's been going on for centuries. I like makeup, yeah. I think it can be good fun. I don't wear it all the time. I wear it when I feel like wearing it. If I go out, I often do wear it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think the way that people point at things and say, oh, you must be homosexual or bisexual, I mean, not that I think that matters anyway. That's just a personal preference. For me, it doesn't mean anything other than it's something to do with the way you look. And if you feel like wearing makeup, why not?
It seems to me throughout this conversation that you are, as much as you care about fashion and the style and the makeup, so to speak, it's your music that speaks for you and Duran Duran, and you want to be represented by that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, I'll start that again. I think music is by far the most important thing. I mean, it's all very well talking about fashion and style, which I don't mind doing at all, because I'm interested in that. But above all of that, I think music has to come first, because for me, that's the start of everything. There's no point me going and wearing a nice shirt or going and seeing, I don't know, some nice museum full of beautiful art if I don't have a focus for myself, a point of reference, if you like. And it all starts with music, and then from there I think a lot of other interesting things can happen. It opens up avenues. I mean, when we started Duran Duran, we always said that there's many different things we all want to do. I mean, I ventured out and I started doing some photography, which is something I'd always been interested in. But still, I end up coming back to music.
Back to the Future.
No, not Back to the Future. Gosh, that film.
Let's
not talk about
where
that.
is Duran Duran headed now?
Duran Duran
is coming next.
Oh, that'd be telling. Duran Duran always heads forward, I think, is the easiest way to explain it. I wouldn't like to make another record that I thought sounded similar to the last one we made. It's always been important to move on, and I think we have done that. If you compare songs like Planet Earth through Save a Prayer, and then more recently Wild Boys, View to a Kill, Reflex, they all sound very different to me. I hope they do to other people too. I'm sure the new Duran Duran will sound very different again, not the same as Power Station or Arcadia.
What were your rock star fashion fantasies as a kid? Was it black leather, or was it a gold suit like Elvis had from Nudies, or was it Space Oddity drag?
No, as a kid, I don't think I really did particularly want to own any of the clothes that other rock stars had. I don't know, I never thought of it in that kind of light. It's a difficult thing to talk about. I think that it's only when you start doing something yourself that you realize how you want to look. Difficult, don't know.
So you know, many people went through the phase of wanting the gold lame suit.
Oh, I definitely wouldn't have wanted the gold lame suit.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Forward though to me, I mean, you know, the suits, I always like the black guys that click the fingers together with the suits on there. That's always a great image.
Compared to, for instance, the Beatles and Carnaby Street, that was much closer to home for you.
The Beatles are another group I really didn't grow up with at all. I mean, I only know Beatles songs from what my parents had played me, or obviously now I've heard all of them. But I mean, that had a massive effect in England and around the world, obviously. But to me, it didn't really affect. I mean, it's very difficult to say sometimes, because I never feel that I'm influenced specifically by any one group. I mean, it's often been quoted about Duran Duran that there's David Bowie and Roxy Music, which were groups I grew up with, and I still like to listen to that music now. But other than that, there was many other things. I think it was to do with the time, the fact that the Sex Pistols and the Clash and all the punk rock thing that was happening in England had just become a bit much after about 5 years. By 1970.
We're speeding.
Nick, we're going to talk about fashion and style and its role with rock and roll. Tell me a little bit about, do you remember the Motown stars at all and the way they used to dress in formal wear?
Motown's something that I didn't grow up with, so I don't really remember them that specifically, but I mean, obviously you see films and you look back over footage of Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross and all those people. I mean, I think that they used to write really great songs then. The imagery was pretty straightforward. 78, I guess, it was dying. And that was when I think it was time in England for something a little more glamorous again. It was to do with attitude. When I say a little more glamorous, I mean somebody that actually bothered about what they were wearing, the sort of places they were playing, and actually putting on a show, as opposed to just getting up on stage in their jeans and playing guitars. Everything I'd always grown up with was to do with performance, really, an overall concept, as opposed to just music. The music I was doing, because it really was a previous generation. It obviously affected the music that I grew up with, but not me personally.
I take it then that your memories of the glamour period, the glam period, are very strong?
Yeah, from the 1970s, I think that's where most of my musical influence comes from. I mean...
Could you tell me that again? Where does most of your musical influence come from?
Right. Most of my musical influence comes from the 1970s, I suppose, just because that's what I grew up with.